commentary.
Today, we need to start by talking about a very specific type of disappointment.
Oh, yeah. The kind I think everyone listening has probably experienced at some point.
Right. Whether you follow politics really closely or you just pay attention to what's happening in your own workplace,
Mm-hmm.
it's that moment when the energy in the room or the country just feels completely electric. The status quo is clearly broken. Everyone is angry.
The momentum is really building.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And it feels like we are on the precipice of this massive sweeping revolution.
The point where change feels not just possible, but inevitable.
Right, inevitable. You brace yourself for the explosion,
Right.
for the new era, and then nothing happens.
Or, well, more accurately, something happens, but it's just really boring.
Yeah, it's a committee. Or a slight adjustment to the tax code.
A pilot program.
A pilot program. That is the worst. And the revolution just kind of evaporates.
And the immediate reaction we all have is usually to blame the person at the front of the room.
Oh,
We say the leader lost their nerve, or the messaging was off, or they just didn't rally the base hard enough. We always treat it as a failure of personnel.
but the deep dive we are doing today suggests that we are actually looking at this completely wrong.
We are.
We're looking at a stack of research centered around an article titled, Why Radical Change Rarely Wins, and What Really Moves Society.
It's a fascinating read.
It really is. And the core argument here is, well, it's going to frustrate a lot of people, but it might also explain absolutely everything.
Yeah, it argues that the failure of radical change isn't a bug in the system. It's actually a feature of our biology.
Which is wild. This is where behavioral science sort of crashes into political strategy.
Exactly. The source material argues that while we love the idea of a fresh start, our brains are fundamentally wired to view radical change as a threat to survival.
So we are going to explore the mechanics of what they call status quo bias. But we're going to go a lot deeper than just saying people hate change.
Right, because it's more strategic than that. We're going to look at how political systems and really astute strategists actually weaponize that biological fear to kill revolutions before they even start.
And the really counterintuitive part, the sources suggest that the boring middle ground, the stuff we usually just roll our eyes at,
Pilot program.
the pilot programs, right? That stuff is actually the most powerful force for changing society.
It just does it so slowly we don't notice.
Yeah. So let's start with the brain. Why are we so incredibly bad at accepting the radical changes that we claim we want?
Well, it starts with that concept of status quo bias.
Yeah.
But we really need to be careful not to trivialize it.
Okay.
This isn't just about ordering the same coffee every morning because you know it tastes good. This is deeply rooted in loss aversion.
Loss aversion.
Right. In behavioral economics, we know that the psychological pain of losing something is roughly twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining something of equal value.
Okay, so if I propose a brand new system, let's say it might be 50% better than what we have now.
Sure.
But getting there requires completely tearing down the current structure.
Your brain doesn't actually focus on that potential 50% gain.
Really?
No, it focuses almost entirely on the 100% certainty of the initial loss.
Wow.
The source material highlights that humans don't just prefer stability. We have an active cognitive preference for current conditions unless the alternative is absolutely guaranteed to be safe.
So we aren't naturally against improvement. Like, we do want things to be better.
We do, but the text specifies we want change that is familiar, incremental, and predictable.
Which is a paradox, isn't it?
Oh, so?
Because the word radical, by definition, means unfamiliar and unpredictable.
Right.
So are we saying that any movement promising a revolution is basically fighting a losing battle against human evolution right from day one?
In many ways, yes. The text argues that the fear of the unknown isn't just some cliche. It's a literal survival mechanism.
Because historically the unknown was dangerous?
Evolutionarily, sticking with a known environment, even a deeply flawed one, kept you alive. Venturing into the unknown, even if it might be a lush paradise, carried a huge risk of death.
Okay, that makes sense.
So when a political leader stands up today and says, we are going to upend the system completely, a significant portion of the population doesn't actually hear hope.
Were they here?
They experience a visceral biological alarm bell.
That reframes the whole leadership failure narrative completely.
It really does.
You could have the most charismatic speaker in all of human history,
Yeah.
but if they are pitching disruption, They are triggering a physical threat response in the audience's amygdala.
Precisely.
Right.
And this is where the nuance of the source material gets really interesting. It claims that this bias creates a hard ceiling for radical movements.
The ceiling.
Yeah, they can get the diehards, the people who truly have nothing to lose.
Right.
But to actually win and enact change, you need the middle. And the middle is terrified of disruption.
Which leads us perfectly to the second, and honestly the most cynical part of this research, the safety valve.
Yes.
If radical change is the explosion, the safety valve is the thing that lets the pressure out just a second before the tank bursts.
That's a great way to put it.
And the source makes a claim here that I initially wanted to challenge. It says radical change usually only succeeds when moderate alternatives are absent.
That is the historical pattern the text identifies.
So if the public perceives that the absolute only way to fix a massive problem is to burn the house to the ground,
Then they might actually sign up for the arson, yes.
but that is a really rare set of circumstances.
Very rare. Because usually there is an option B.
The moderate reform.
Right, the credible middle ground option. The text extensively analyzes how the introduction of a moderate option impacts public support for radical movements.
And the math is pretty brutal, right?
It is brutal. If you offer a solution that promises improvement without what they call excessive disruption, support for the extreme proposal just completely collapses.
It sounds like a literal release valve for collective anxiety.
Exactly.
But I have to ask, is this effective because it actually solves the underlying problem, or just because it makes us feel safe again?
Well, that is the million-dollar question. From a purely psychological perspective, it works because it lowers the cognitive cost of the decision.
You get to feel like you're supporting progress.
Right, you're doing something. But you don't have to incur the risk of total chaos. It acts as a stabilizer.
But from a systemic perspective, you could easily argue it prevents necessary deep structural changes.
Yes. It keeps the system on life support rather than letting it evolve into something genuinely new.
Or, I guess from the other side, it prevents the system from collapsing into complete anarchy.
It really depends on your perspective.
Yeah.
But the mechanism itself is undeniable. When a moderate option appears, it just siphons off the energy that drives the revolution.
It splits the coalition.
Yes. The people who just wanted things to be a little better take the moderate deal and go home. And that leaves the true radicals completely isolated.
And this isn't accidental. This is where the source material transitions from psychology into outright strategy.
Right.
It explicitly discusses how conservative or stability-oriented groups actively use this. And we should clarify for you listening, conservative here doesn't mean a specific political party in the U.S. sense.
Yeah, not at all.
It means any institution trying to conserve the status quo.
Correct. Whether it's a corporation, a government, or just a very large institution, if you are in power and you see a radical movement gaining serious steam, your first instinct might be to just crush it.
To say, no, we are doing absolutely nothing.
Right, which, based on what we just discussed, would be a massive mistake.
Because if you offer nothing, the radical option is the only game in town.
Exactly. If you block all change, you back the public into a corner where revolution is literally the only path to improvement.
So what's the smarter play?
The smarter strategic play, what they call the weaponization of the middle, is to introduce a compromise yourself.
You undercut the radicals by agreeing with them, but only like 20%.
You agree with the problem, but you offer a safe solution. You introduce a reform that addresses maybe the most visible grievances, but leaves the core structure entirely intact.
And the text notes this strategy specifically targets individuals who are not deeply committed to ideological extremes.
The mushy middle.
The mushy middle, yes. The people who are uncomfortable with the status quo, but still totally terrified of the revolution.
Right. By giving them a moderate option, you easily peel them away. The radical movement loses its mass appeal and suddenly shrinks back down to just the core ideologues.
It's strategic co-optation. It feels almost manipulative when you lay it out so plainly like that.
It is.
You're using the public's biological fear of change to protect the system from change by offering just a tiny little bit of change.
It is manipulative in a game theory sense for sure, but it's also just how stability is maintained in any complex society.
How so?
Well, if every single grievance led to a full-blown revolution, society would be impossible to sustain. You can think of moderate reform as the immune system of the status quo.
The immune system. I like that. But wait a minute. If the system is rigged to protect itself, and our brains are wired to fear big jumps, and the powers that be are constantly weaponizing the middle to kill radicalism.
How did we get here?
Yeah, how did we get here? Because we aren't living in feudalism. We have civil rights, we have advanced technology, we have social safety nets. Society does change.
Often very dramatically.
Right. So how does that happen?
That is the ultimate paradox. We look at history and we see massive shifts, but the source material argues we are actually misremembering how they happened.
We remember the protests and the big speeches.
Exactly. But the actual permanent shift often came from what the text calls the drifting center.
Drifting center. Sounds like a tectonic plate metaphor.
It basically is. The text points out a harsh reality of political competition. The edges are frozen.
Meaning?
Firm conservatives and firm progressives rarely switch sides. You aren't going to convince a hardcore revolutionary to suddenly become a traditionalist.
So the edges just don't move at all.
Right. But the definition of what society considers normal is highly fluid. The argument here is that long-term change happens not by exploding the system, but by gradual shifts in the center of public opinion.
So what we consider a moderate, boring compromise today might have been considered radical insanity 50 years ago.
Exactly. Think about something like the 8-hour workday or universal suffrage.
Sure.
At one point in history, these were radical system-breaking demands. Today, they are just the baseline status quo.
Nobody even thinks about them.
Right. That didn't happen because one day everyone woke up and decided to be a radical. It happened because the center drifted.
And the mechanism for this drift.
It's the constant friction of all these debates. Every single time the radicals push and the system counters with a moderate reform, the baseline moves just a little bit.
So each electoral cycle or societal debate subtly redefines the middle.
Yes, it's like the frog in the boiling water, but in reverse.
Right.
We are being boiled into progress.
Boiled into progress. That's a great image, but we don't notice it happening.
We don't. The crucial point the sources make is that this process often happens without widespread awareness of the sheer magnitude of the shift.
Because each step just feels like a safe, moderate choice at the time.
Exactly. So we never trigger that status quo bias alarm bell.
That is fascinating. So if you try to jump 10 feet, everyone panics and fights you.
Right.
But if you take 101-inch steps, nobody really notices until you're suddenly 10 feet away.
And that is exactly why the boring middle is actually the true engine of change. It is the vehicle that allows society to move without breaking. It totally bypasses the psychological resistance to disruption.
Which brings us to the final and I think most philosophical piece of the source material. It references a quote by Peter Senge that I really think unlocks the why behind all of this.
Yes. People do not resist change, they resist being changed.
People do not resist change, they resist being changed. When I first read that, it just felt like semantics.
It sounds like a riddle at first.
Yeah, but in the context of this whole discussion, it feels like the absolute key to the entire puzzle.
Because it shifts the conversation from a fear of the new to a fear of losing control. It's fundamentally about agency.
Can you break that down a bit more? What is the actual difference in the human brain?
Think about your own life. You probably love change when it's your idea.
Sure.
You get a new job, you move to a new city, you buy a new car. We actively seek out novelty.
Right. I chose those things.
Exactly. But if someone comes into your office and says, we are restructuring and you have a totally new role starting Monday, you panic, you resist.
Even if it's a better role.
Yes.
Yeah.
The outcome might be exactly the same. You have a new job, but in one scenario, you chose it, and the other, it was done to you.
So resisting change implies we are just stubborn.
Right?
But resisting being changed implies we are actually just defending our autonomy.
Exactly. Radical political movements often fail because they feel like an imposition. They feel like a small group of people saying, we are going to take your world and reshape it, and you just have to come along.
It naturally triggers a defensive reaction. Don't tell me what to do.
Right. Whereas moderate reform, precisely because it is negotiated, compromised, and much slower, feels far more like a choice.
It feels like we're consenting to the shift.
Yes. It preserves the illusion, or in some cases, the reality of agency.
So the strategy of the drifting center works because it allows people to feel like they are still firmly in the driver's seat, even as the car is heading to a completely different destination.
It minimizes the feeling of coercion. And if you are a leader or an activist listening to this deep dive, that is a truly critical insight.
You can't just be right.
No. If you want to move people, you can't just have the right facts or the moral high ground. You have to navigate their psychological need for agency. You have to make the change feel like an evolution they are actively participating in, not a revolution. They are just surviving.
It really forces us to rethink what winning actually looks like in society.
It does.
We all want the movie moment. We want the victory parade where everything changes overnight. But maybe real winning is just moving the center 1 inch to the left or right and then waking up and doing it again next year.
Yeah. It's significantly less romantic, certainly, but the historical evidence suggests it's far more durable.
So let's wrap this up for you listening. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the biology of loss aversion all the way to political game theory. What is the ultimate takeaway here?
I think there are three main pillars to hold on to from these sources. First, recognize the status quo bias in yourself and in others, not as stupidity or laziness, but as a really deep-seated survival mechanism.
We are wired to fear the loss of stability more than we value the potential of gain.
Exactly. Second, understand the safety valve. Moderate reform isn't just a watered-down version of radical change.
Right.
It's a strategic tool that actively stabilizes the system. It can be used cynically to kill momentum, yes, but it's also the mechanism that allows diverse societies to function without descending into constant conflict.
And finally, the concept of the drifting center.
Right. Don't look for the explosion, look for the drift. Real enduring change is almost always the accumulation of boring, invisible shifts that slowly redefine what is normal over time.
It really gives you a completely different lens for watching the news, doesn't it?
It changes everything.
When you see political gridlock, or you see a compromise that seems to just make absolutely everyone unhappy, you might actually be watching the engine of change doing its ugly, boring work.
And you should ask yourself that question from Senge. Are people actually fighting the issue, or are they just fighting the feeling of being changed?
Which brings up a final thought to leave you with. If our societal resistance really is just about that loss of agency rather than the issues themselves, what would happen if we completely stopped relying on top-down mandates?
Oh, that is an interesting thought.
Yeah. If we redesigned our institutions so that sweeping changes were only ever built directly from the grassroots up, where nobody ever felt forced by a leader again.
Would status quo bias just vanish entirely?
Exactly. Or without leaders pushing us, would we still just fundamentally choose to keep things exactly the same? Something for you to mull over on your own. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
A pleasure as always.
We'll see you on the next deep dive. Stay curious.